A new novel from Maeve Binchy is always a cause for celebration, but this year that celebration is tempered by the news that Maeve Binchy died recently, just a few months before the publication of A Week in Winter. I'd actually talked to Maeve a few years ago and thought now might be a nice opportunity to share some of her warmth and her enthusiasm and affection for her characters and for the Ireland that shaped her.
I think an awful lot of Irish people write, well, they only write when they leave Ireland simply because we're having too much fun in Ireland. If you and I were sitting in Ireland, and we'd be sitting in a pub one evening and I'd be talking about the television series I was going to write and you would tell me about the play. And then maybe in about that you were going to write. In about 3 weeks' time, you might have moved, you're going to write a small, slim collection of poetry and I was going to write an epic novel set in the famine. Now, none of us would ever do any of these things because we were so happy talking about them and nobody in Ireland would expect you to do them because talk is the most important thing. When I went to live in England, I foolishly occasionally opened my mouth about the things I was going to do, and the English are different people. If you say to an English person you're going to write a book, the next time you meet them they say, what happened to that book? No Irish person would be bad-mannered enough to ask you where it was, because they'd know, like their own book, it was just up there at the back of your head. And also when I went to England, I was quite lonely, which is an odd thing. You don't like to admit that you're lonely when you're 33. It means like that you're unpopular or you're hated. You must always assume that you have friends. But I thought when I went to England that I'd know everybody and they'd be coming down the street saying hello Maeve to me in Fleet Street, which existed in those days. And I was actually very lonely. So I had time to write. I had time to write, and B, people expected you to write if you said you were going to do so. And I found that going away from Ireland made me write, not because Mother Ireland was crucifying me and choking me and forbidding me to write. It was simply that I was having too good a time there and meeting too many people. And that is my absolute excuse for why I didn't start to write fiction until I left Ireland.
So what do you think books like Frank McCourt's Angela's Ashes have done for Irish writing?
I think they have made people courageous and unafraid to talk about their bitter and miserable childhood. You see, when I read Angela's Ashes, I was transfixed by it because I could not believe that anyone could have lived in such poverty in a town 90 miles away from the one I lived in. I could not believe there was such poverty. And yet I knew that every word of it was true. And of course I realised that when I was growing up in the 40s and 50s, we were definitely a country of haves and have-nots, and the have-nots did not get proper medical service, they did not have anywhere to live, no kindly government looked after them, and they were not educated. So he spoke the truth.
Do Irish people make a distinction between commercial popular fiction and literary fiction in the way that we do here?
Yes, I think they do. I mean, there are writers in Ireland, I'm just thinking of, say, people like Dermot Bolger and John Banville and Anne Enright, who would all be considered literary fiction writers. And there are popular writers, in which I would include myself and Deirdre Purcell and Patricia Scanlon and quite a lot of other people who have bestsellers, which are definitely in the commercial and popular end. There isn't, to my mind, maybe I'm very, very over-cheerful, there isn't a huge war between us, because I think we all set out to do what we're going to do, and there's a place for both.
How do you feel, though, when your books are described as perfect holiday reads?
Well, again, I must be the sunniest person in the universe, but I think this is a bit of a compliment, because my books are long, they're usually at least 500 pages. Not everybody has time to read them at home, and if they take them on a holiday to have some time to concentrate on them, that's great. I was standing at Dublin Airport there in the beginning of September, and Tara Road was just out, and most people were going on the plane. They're all going to a holiday in the Canary Islands, and almost everybody had it under their arms, like their boarding card, you see, or their passport. And so as it happened, because I was standing there, I was signing them all. I was standing beside the girl who was taking their tickets, and the woman came along without one, and I said, well, where is it? You should be having it with you. And she swore to me that she'd read it and she could tell me the plot. Well, you see, I don't regard this as totally down market and pathetic. I regard this as people who want to get lost in the story. And you see, also, it is escapist in a sense that it's not your own life, but it's not escapist. The kind of fiction I write is not escapist in the sense that it's not filled with the beautiful rich, and it's not filled with boardroom dramas and with a lot of jewellery and designer clothes. I wouldn't know designer clothes. I wouldn't know what kind of jewellery people would be interested in. I couldn't tell you about life on a yacht because I was only on a yacht once. I didn't feel well. I had to come off it again. So therefore, I wouldn't be able to describe that kind of life. I wouldn't be of the position where people say, let me get lost in an imaginary world. In my stories, the people you meet are just kind of ordinary people that you know already, and they have the problems that you know already. So if people want to read about that and get lost in somebody else's life, either on holiday or at a weekend, or that they feel it's escapism, I'm very pleased with that.
I love the way in Tara Road you describe Rhea Lynch's kitchen, and I can almost smell the coffee and the baking. Is that reminiscent of a kitchen that you grew up in?
It's fairly like our own kitchen. When I was young, my mother was always terrified that we'd all go out somewhere else, and because she was very protective, some might say, or possessive, others would say, she was terrified that we would go somewhere else, we might ride on bicycles and fall and break our legs, and she kept feeling that if she had them all around her at home, at least she'd feel safe. So all our friends were very welcome in our house, and it was very interesting when my parents died and we moved from that house, that lots of my friends said that they felt bereft because that house was part of their childhood. Growing up there, they were always so welcome. On a Saturday, there could be 16 or 18 people sitting down to supper around a big kitchen table, and so that is a memory. I think my father, who was a very shy man, would have been rather startled by this, as was the husband in Tower Road, because there was almost too much company. Except that he was a lawyer and he had his own study, and it was kind of known that father went to his study to work in it, and cups of coffee were brought into him rather than him always joining in the general melee.
A little bit like the father in evening class, who has his own sort of den, doesn't he?
That's true, and I suppose we bring everything into it, every little bit we know. The only success that I can see, or secret of the success, is that I only write about things I know, and this is why I don't have so many of the other things which are meant to be aspects of a popular novel. I don't have makeovers, for example. The people in my books don't begin one way and end another by outside experience. I mean, they don't begin fat and end up thin, or they don't begin poor and end up rich, and they don't begin single and end up married, because I know an awful lot of thin, rich, married people who are bitterly unhappy, and these are not necessarily the solutions to happiness. The solution to happiness, I suppose, if it's not too great a blinding glimpse into the obvious, is that we've got to take control of our own lives.
Maeve Binchy will be much missed by her readers, but her formidable output, she must have written nearly as fast as she spoke, is a permanent memorial to a woman who had such affection for her characters and for the country that she came from.